So the question then is, what do we do with this phrase, God breathed? Often, this is the verse that will be used to argue for what is known as verbal plenary inspiration. And that is literally the idea that God spoke each word exactly as it was intended to the author who then wrote it down. And the idea here is that God breathed means God literally breathed out the words. This is what we see in something that's called the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy. Now, this is a document that was created in 1978. That's the year I was born, so not very long ago, depending on your perspective, I propose. Certainly not all that long ago in the light of the history of Christianity. But prior to 1978, the only doctrine of inerrancy said that the scriptures were, quote, to be acknowledged as teaching solidly, faithfully, and without error regarding salvation. In other words, the Bible can use myths and parables, as we've seen. The Bible can provide contextual commentary, as we have observed. It offers us perspective and opinion, as we've read, but it never fails to faithfully point us to Jesus. That, by the way, is the historical, orthodox definition of inerrancy. It's one I have no issue with. In fact, I embrace that completely. What happened is that in 1978, the Chicago Statement was commissioned by a group of American evangelical leaders, and they changed that historical doctrine to a statement that read, being wholly and verbally God-given, Scripture is without error or fault in all of its teachings, no less in what it states about God's acts in creation or about the events of world history than in its witness to God's saving grace in individual lives. See what they did? It is no longer enough to trust that the Bible reveals salvation perfectly in Jesus. You must now believe that the Bible is the perfect record of world history as well. Now, this debate had largely erupted from earlier in the 20th century as geologists started making discoveries about the age of the Earth. But the 1978 statement was crafted to repudiate earlier, more orthodox understandings of inerrancy that had shaped largely the church for our first 2,000 years. Now, it's fine if you read the Bible that way. Many people do. But what most of us don't realize is that this framework for biblical inerrancy, extending beyond salvation to things like the age of the earth or world history, that is only 45 years old. It is not how the church has historically talked about and understood the scriptures. So what then does God breathe mean if it doesn't mean divinely dictated? Well, the Greek word here is Theopnustos, and that is very literally God and breathed. So the translation is not bad. Those are the words, what it means. The question is, what does it hold for us? And there was a fascinating book that was released in just 2021 by the scholar John Poirier. Unfortunately, it is one of those university press academic books that speaks in a lot of technical jargon and costs way too much money to get a hold of. But the book is called The Invention of the Inspired Text, and it does this fascinating job of walking through all of the literature in the first few centuries of the church, looking at this word Theopnustos. What the book demonstrates is that God breathed was a very common adjective used in a lot of writings to mean life-giving. As in, God breathed into the dust of Genesis and gave life to humanity. God breathed as in the dry bones of Ezekiel were breathed into and brought life back to Israel. Theopnustos was being used in Second Temple Judaism to speak of all the ways God's Spirit brings life to us. And here the writer of 1 Timothy says Scripture is now one more way that the Spirit of God is present, breathing life into our lungs every day when we open the Bible and read. In other words, Theopnustos is not a technical description of how the scriptures were inspired. It is an affirmation of the fact that they are. All scripture is life-giving. All scripture is useful for teaching. All scripture reveals to us the story of Jesus, and it is Jesus that we trust to lead us back to God. That is what we are saying when we say, alongside 2,000 years of church history, that the scriptures are inspired.